Okay, here we go with the first actual honest-to-goodness lecture for human biology. But before we start, I just want to put this up. I'll put this up a few more times as we go through. If you want to call into the lab and talk to me directly, you can always send me an email. But if you'd rather talk, sometimes that works better. You can come into the lab, is that the building will be open and the lab will be available, and I'll be available during these times. You know, at least once during the week you'll be in here for the lab, so one presumes, but this is the rest of the time. So on Monday, if we were doing regular semester, I'd have a lecture schedule, a lot of stuff going on from 9 to 1. I may be in here doing some stuff. I may be doing this, so it's possible that you'll have some lecture videos where I'll talk and the phone will ring and I'll have to stop it and pick up after I talk to the person on the phone. That's okay, because I never know when I'm going to be recording these things. I can't really shut you out for a bunch of hours when I might or might not be recording. Got a lab for this class, half of this class, on Monday afternoon, when we have Mondays. Tuesday, I've got a lab in the morning and a lab in the afternoon, so I'll be available from 11 to 1. Wednesday is another lecture day for me. I'd be in the lab from 9 to 1. Thursday, another 2 lab day for me, 11 to 1. I'll be available. And Friday is another lecture day for me, so I'll be available from 9 to 12, slightly earlier day. And as I said, those are the times that if you want to call in, you want to talk to me about something, extension 8864, call into the school, and 8864 is the one it goes. If you know your party's extension, well, that's your party's extension. And it rings the lab phone. And if for one reason or another I'm not here, I don't believe you can leave a voicemail on the lab phone. There is another number on the syllabus. I think it's 8610. I never use it, so I kind of forget. Now, for an awful lot of your questions, this is also the answer. You got the syllabus online. There's a copy that was made available. I may have given it out in the lab. I haven't quite worked all the bugs out right now. It's still the end of July, so not entirely sure what we're doing when September comes around. But most of the stuff people want to know, it's in the syllabus. It's on my online page for this particular class. It should be up on Blackboard for this particular class. And I should have gone over it in the introductory to this class lecture video. I haven't done that. I'm delaying that until just before September so that I'm kind of up to date on just how we're going to do and what we're going to do and when we're going to do stuff. But it's available to you at the point in time where you're going to want it. What we're going to do in the class is work our way from small to big. It is a biology class, it's a science class. There's some terminology we got to kind of handle. I'm not going to get too much into the details of it. In my other biology classes, it's the type of thing that makes people's heads explode. So, but you can't totally ignore it when you're talking about human health, human biology. So we're going to work our way up through some of the very tiniest building blocks that go into us so that we've got a little bit of a shared language going into the bigger things. Then we're going to talk about what causes diseases, working from the tiniest things up to the bigger things. And then we'll talk about systems, starting with the systems that work pretty much on a molecular level, going up to systems that work on a kind of a bigger level. So small to large is going to be kind of the approach. Now here's where it gets tricky. I don't write a lot up here. I write and walk and talk. And if all you do is write the stuff that's here, then later I ask you a question on an exam about it, you go through your notes are not gonna really tell you much unless you've got a really good memory, and some people do. Some people can write very little and remember everything they need to later from very simple, sorry, my email just went off. From very simple notes. But a lot of people are gonna have to figure out what needs to be added to this, which is a really good skill to have, is that I sit in meetings where, you know, they give us stuff to do or they tell us how to do stuff, and I take notes and have to take enough notes so that later when I look at it and I go, okay, now I need to do this with Blackboard, I know I wrote that down somewhere and how to do that, is that I don't want to look and go, oh crap, I didn't really write enough down to help me. I'm gonna have to find somebody to help me now. Knowing what you need to write for your particular memory, which mine is getting worse, that's the secret of taking notes. And a tremendous number of jobs you get with a college education, there will be times where you need to be sitting with a, you know, with either, you know, typing your notes out on a screen or writing them. I write them down on a pad because I'm old. Atoms, tiny, 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 tiny things, is that they're the smallest part of an element. So hydrogen atoms, oxygen atoms, carbon atoms, nitrogen atoms. In the case of us, we use a lot of things in an atomic form, sort of. There's a lot of atoms that come in an uncharged form, which is incredibly unstable, so you very rarely find them in the world, and you don't want to mess with them anyway. And they come in a stable form where, because of the way the electrons work, they have positive and negative charges, and they're called ions. The old term for this is electrolytes. So when, you know, Gatorade talks about electrolyte solutions, is that they're really talking about ions. Things like sodium and magnesium. An awful lot of the minerals that we use nutritionally come in this charged form. Is that uncharged sodium, you take a pill of uncharged sodium, it would make you explode. So that would be bad. But in its ionic form, it works totally differently. As that the other half of table salt is chloride. It's the ionic form of chlorine. You can eat that all day. You don't want the uncharged form of chlorine. That's what's in bleach. So that's why we need to talk about this, is when people talk about ions, they're talking about these little charged atoms that we use for various things in our body that a lot of times we need to one extent or another in our nutrition. Is the chloride you need a decent amount of, sodium you need a decent amount of, but you can overdo the sodium. And it also, we're gonna talk about molecules. Molecules come in ionic forms too. Sometimes they're charged. Is a lot of times they're not, but sometimes they are. Molecules are atoms that are bonded together. And when they're bonded together, they form entities that work differently than the atoms do on their own. Hydrogen and oxygen are gases. You link two hydrogens to an oxygen, you got water. It behaves totally differently from hydrogen gas, it behaves totally differently from oxygen gas. You can't breathe water and use it for the oxygen that's in the H2O. Is that the only oxygen that's in water is actually oxygen dissolved in the water. And unfortunately, it doesn't dissolve well in water. So even if you could magically extract the oxygen from the water and breathe it, our metabolism is too high. It couldn't support you. You couldn't breathe water and get by anyway. So that's one of the reasons why our relatives that have gone back into the water permanently, like whales, even things like reptiles, like crocodiles and alligators, they got to come up to the surface to breathe air. Way more oxygen in the air than can dissolve in water. And once your metabolism is kind of a used to the air metabolism, like you get in crocodiles and turtles and whales and dolphins and walruses, you're not going to be able to adapt that to breathing the oxygen in water. It just doesn't work that way. But we're going to talk about 4 classes of molecules that you find in living things. So these are types of molecules, starting with one everybody's heard of. Carbohydrates, sugars and starches. Long, long ago, when chemists were first kind of working the bugs out of this, they found that if they tried to completely break these things down, they would wind up with this black carbon stuff, and water would evaporate off of it. So they said hydrated carbon, carbohydrates. It's an oversimplification. Most of the molecules in us have carbon and water in them if you break them down. But that's where the name comes from. And this is a combination of little molecules, which are sugars, and long strings of sugars, which are starches. And here's a typical sugar molecule. Oops. Sugar molecules form rings with a little oxygen as a bridge on the ring. They can open up and occasionally exist as this unringed form, but that happens spontaneously. Everything on the atomic and molecular level is shaking like crazy. They're zipping around, they're bopping off of one another, and so they change. And this thing does occasionally open up, but this is a much less stable form than this. And it is thought that a lifetime of being exposed to these rare opened molecules is one of the things that contributes to aging, because these things can get into all of your other molecules and screw with them. And what it turns out is if you look at somebody who's lifelong diabetic, who's had a lot of sugar fluctuations, including high sugar levels through their lifetime, a lot of the symptoms of diabetes as you get older are basically accelerated aging. So that's there's a whole bunch of things that make you age. This may be one of them. This is the basic fuel molecule of most living things. It's glucose. Table sugar is one of these, and a fructose attached to it, splits into glucose and fructose. And they both can be used for energy. Basically what we do is we pop those carbons apart that were originally put together by plants. The process of photosynthesis makes the glucose in the first place, using light energy to stick the carbons together. And then the energy's in the molecules for everybody else to use, including the plants that made it. There are animals that can make glucose, but they don't do it by sitting in the light and cranking it out. They actually use a bunch of energy because we do need glucose for some things. If you think about this, your typical cat does not get a lot of sugars and starches in its diet. But there are systems that require sugar and starch. They actually use proteins and lipids and other molecules for energy. But they do occasionally make glucose in their livers. So this originates in photosynthesis. The plants make the sugars. They stick a bunch of the sugars together as starches. And what you get in the starches let me connect this to the side. Starches are long strings of sugar stuck together. The plants make starches to do two things. They make starches that they're going to use later. They're going to pull the starches apart and use the sugars to do things. Or they're going to build plant structure with starches. This is cellulose. This is the fiber starch that's in plants. And because it's used to build the plant, they build this in a way where it doesn't come apart very easily. These things, just the simple strings or the simple branch strings, are not that hard to pull back apart and get the sugars back out of. In the case of a potato, they put the starch underground. Later on, they can use it for energy. They can use it to build more plant. what we do is we also take sugar in and we make a simple string of it that's relatively easy to break down. This is stored in your liver. So you take sugar in, your pancreas goes, oh crap, that's way too much sugar. And it sends a message using insulin to your liver cells for the most part. To pull these sugars out for a while and store them. And your liver stores them as these long strings, and then later on when you're not eating, Captain Crunch for breakfast, and you need the sugar back, these things get broken down and sent back up to us. But the reason that there are digestible starches from plants and indigestible starches from plants, it depends on what the plants were going to do with them. In a lot of cases, the plants wanted to make a starch they could break down easily later to use, so those are easy for us to break down. When the plants are building themselves out of starches, that's a tricky thing to get. I mean, it's a lot of energy in there, but we don't really have the digestive capabilities to do it. It takes a pretty specialized digestive system to get that stuff all broken down. And it almost always uses little buddy bacteria to do it, because our digestive capabilities are not really that capable of doing that. In our bodies, carbohydrates are primarily used for energy. We do use fructose to build some other molecules. And sometimes later you may see pictures of markers on cells with little strings of these guys on them. And so we do use little strings of sugars to make our markers very particular for one cell versus another cell. The difference between the different ABO blood types is actually the strings of sugars on the markers. And that's how we tell our own stuff from invading stuff a lot of times. Okay, I'm going to try to break this down into fairly small bits, so I'm going to stop this one and we'll pick up the next type of molecule in the next video.